All right, with that said, Mr. Kearse, you may proceed when you're ready.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning. You were chosen as jurors, as representatives of our community, to make your decisions, and you have made those decisions. You have convicted the defendant of the first-degree murder of Rick Anderson, and in doing that murder, he used a dangerous and deadly weapon, the black baseball bat. You have convicted the defendant of the first-degree murder of Michael Martin, his own father. He used the same black baseball bat to commit that murder. And you have convicted the defendant of the first-degree murder of Barry Swanson. Again, with the use of a dangerous and deadly weapon, the black baseball bat. And you have found true in your decision-making process that the defendant committed multiple murders. As you know from the instructions you were given before, that required one murder of the first degree and one other murder of the first or second degree. And as you know, in our case, we have 3 first-degree murders. We have the murder of Michael Martin, the defendant's own father. We have the murder of his uncle, Rick Anderson. We have the murder of Barry Swanson, a good man in the wrong place at the wrong time. But that part of the trial is done, and we respect your time and your work as representatives of our community. But now we begin a process beyond the question of guilt. Guilt, we just look at the facts and the law, we saw how they fit together, and we ask ourselves, did we prove the defendant did the crimes? You've answered that question. The question now, ladies and gentlemen, is what is the appropriate and just punishment given what the defendant did? It will be up to you to make the ultimate decision. Each one of you must consider the aggravating and mitigating factors and make a personal moral judgment. Does the defendant deserve life without parole? Does he deserve death? Based on the evidence that has been presented to you, and based on the evidence that will be presented to you, the people will argue at the end of the penalty phase that the aggravating evidence is convincing, is substantial, and warrants the death penalty for the defendant. When you evaluate the evidence, there is no burden of proof in terms of what you need to decide, unlike in the guilt phase. There's a wrinkle, which I'll get to in a moment when it comes to any evidence of other crimes. But for now, we don't have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt. This is a question of your own personal moral judgment, what is appropriate and what's justified. That's because it's not an objective determination like your verdicts in the guilty phase were. It's a subjective moral assessment by you individually as representatives of our community of what is the appropriate punishment for the defendant. But much of the process is going to be the same. You're going to hear and listen to evidence. You're going to come to decisions about what you believe to be true. And given those decisions, then you have to weigh and feel what is the deserving punishment. The judge has read to you the instructions on that weighing process, and at the end of the trial, you will get those instructions again. And as you heard, those instructions were about the aggravating and mitigating circumstances. It's not confusing. An aggravating circumstance is any fact, condition of event that makes the defendant's culpability or blameworthiness increased and greater. It's what's above and beyond the elements of the crime itself that increases the wrongfulness of the defendant's conduct or the harmful impact his conduct had on the victim's family. A mitigating circumstance, as you heard, is any evidence that's presented that somehow lessens the blameworthiness or the culpability, moral culpability for the wrongdoing that the defendant has done. The aggravating evidence that people will rely upon will be the circumstances of the crime, which, as the judge has read to you, is also known as Factor A, and any other violent criminal activity committed by the defendant that involved the use or attempted use of force. So the Factor A circumstance of the crime, that word circumstance does not merely mean a temporal and spatial relationship to the crime. In terms of the crime itself, you have the facts and the elements. What were the facts and what were the elements? Did facts show that the defendant did an act that caused the death of another human being? When we talk about the circumstances of the crime, it extends to those circumstances which surround the crime in a material, moral, or logical way. What flows from the elements and the facts of this crime? It extends also to the specific harm caused by the defendant, including the psychological and emotional impact on the families of the victims. The victims, Rick Anderson, Michael Martin, and Barry Swanson. These were individuals whose deaths represent a unique loss to society and a unique loss to their families. When we look at the facts and circumstances surrounding the crime, we're looking at those facts above and beyond the elements of the crime that increases the severity, the enormity, and the immorality of the crime. We look at a circumstance in terms of the brutality of this crime, the manner and method that each of these men met their demise. You can consider that method and manner of killing as a circumstance of the crime. You can consider that these men were defenseless, unarmed, in some cases physically unable to defend themselves. You consider Rick Anderson, the uncle, hit by surprise in the back of the head. You consider Barry Swanson coming to Mr. Anderson's aid and getting beaten time and time and time again. And of course, you can consider Michael Martin, an invalid, watching and waiting, knowing that the inevitable will happen. You can consider Michael Martin sitting there watching this horror unfold in front of him, knowing that he will be next. Consider this was a brutal attack against his own family, dad, his uncle. Consider Barry Swanson, their second family dies because of his death. You can also consider, as a circumstance of this crime, the lack of remorse at the time of the killing and the callousness with which this killings was done after he had murdered these three individuals. Well, in fact, we know that Ricky Anderson was still alive when he went through Rick's pockets. As he lay there dying, and rummaged through his pockets, rummaged through Michael Martin's pockets and Barry Swanson, stealing their personal belongings. That is a circumstance of the crime that shows a callousness on the part of the defendant. And then, to add insult to injury, he drags his own dad's body into the garage so he can get himself a box of pepper. That is callousness that you can consider evaluating the appropriate and just punishment. Having done the crimes inside that house of horror, he then stole the car, stole Barry Swanson's car, and then took the dog and went to get something to eat at Carl's Jr. The lack of remorse at the scene and the callousness showed by the defendant is aggravating evidence that bears significantly on the moral decision. Should this defendant get life without parole, or should he get death? Within the circumstances of the crime, you can also look at the state of mind of the defendant at the time of this crime. Remember, the circumstances are not just the elements, but they talk about what is materially or logically connected to the crime itself. We're not looking at the aspect of premeditation deliberation, but we're looking at what the defendant did at the time that shows a purposefulness and a rational thinking. He stole the phones from the dying or dead bodies of his murder victims. But when he stole those phones, he got rid of them, put them in the trash, because he knew that technology can track phones, and by tracking phones, find the perpetrator. That shows you his state of mind. He knows he has done wrong, and he needs to get rid of any evidence that can link him to that house of horror. He stole the wallet. He needed to steal the wallet from Barry Swanson to get gas. He goes to the gas station, the credit card doesn't work, so he dumps the wallet. He needs to get rid of that piece of evidence. But that shows his purposeful and rational thinking in that he knew he would need access to a credit card or any money that was in the wallet to make his getaway. He was able to understand at the time of these crimes that Barry's car had no gas. He needed to get gas, could not get gas, so he decided to return to the scene of these murders to try and get Rick's car. Again, what we're seeing here is a state of mind which shows the purposefulness and the rational thinking above and beyond the elements of the crime, the elements, of course, being he took about and beat these people to death. Now, in terms of when he evades the police, he knows the police are there, he knows if he stops, he will be taken to jail. But even at the beginning of the chase, you understand his state of mind. He understood there were policemen there. He stopped, put his hands out the window, which shows that he was aware and understood the commands by the police officers. But then made a rational thinking, if I do give up now, I'm going to jail. I'm going to jail for a long time. So that is when he flees. And of course, that fleeing and that desire not to be arrested, that desire not to be put in jail for at least the rest of your life, and maybe more, that is significant in terms of his rational and appropriate thinking at the time. And that fleeing obviously continues for the fight in the backyard at 8:58:30. When arrested and spoke to by Godfrey, you see there again a appropriateness of his thinking in terms of knowing the consequences of his actions. That state of mind surrounding the crime itself is material and logically flows from the crime and the facts of this crime, and is significant in terms of your personal moral decision as to whether the defendant gets life without parole or death. That's the factor A evidence that some of you heard and will be argued later to you. Factor B evidence is other violent criminal activities committed by the defendant that involve the use or attempted use of force or violence or the express or implied threat to use force. A moment ago I told you that there's no beyond the reasonable doubt requirement when it comes to choosing life or death. The only time you'll see beyond the reasonable doubt apply is in the factors, under factor B, any crime that's charged or alleged to have happened under that factor. You individually must believe that the facts show beyond the reasonable doubt that the crime happened. It's not a collective decision-making process as it was in the guilt phase. It's an individual decision-making process. So if Juror 1 decides, yes, I believe beyond the reasonable doubt these facts are proven, then that decision goes into the weighing process, and Juror number 1, he did that any weight it desires. He desires. Now, if a person, Juror number 2, doesn't believe that the facts show beyond a reasonable doubt for that person that that crime happened, then they can discard that evidence altogether. But it's an individual weighing process whether you believe any crimes charged or alleged on the factor B were proven to you beyond a reasonable doubt. And the evidence under factor B that we'll be looking at are some of the crimes that happened with the fighting with the police and invading the police. Those are factor B crimes which are separate from the circumstances of crime under factor A. Under factor B, you will also hear of acts of violence towards Michael Martin by the defendant, acts of violence by the defendant against Melody Martin, and acts of violence towards his brother, Sean Martin. That evidence will come out through the testimony of Melody Martin or Sean Martin. And once you've considered that aggravating evidence, you can place that aggravating evidence together with the factors in aggravation under factor A. Once the defense presents their evidence, you can consider and weigh the mitigating evidence. In that weighing process, you will then be able to make a decision regarding the death penalty. And it's difficult to describe to you, it's difficult to weigh, it's difficult to measure certain human suffering. You're asked as jurors to do certain things in this case. You're asked to weigh the heartache, the pain, and suffering of the families in this case. Consider that suffering, the loss of their loved ones, as aggravating circumstances in making your decision. Consider all the evidence, just as you did before you make your decision. Dedicate yourselves to the truth and come into the right verdict. And come into that right verdict, you will make a decision. You will make a choice in the same way that the defendant made a choice when he chose to kill 3 men in the most brutal and callous way. But the defendant chose his own path. He chose his own path, and he chose to kill. Ricky Anderson, Michael Martin, and Barry Swanson had no choice. They had no choice. The defendant, an evil man, killed 3 good men. And after hearing all the evidence, we will ask you to render a certain type of verdict. A verdict that the brutality and callousness of this horrible and evil act demands. We will ask you to return a just punishment and a necessary punishment. A punishment of death. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kurz.